who better to do so than Neil Allen, athletics correspondent of the Times, who saw both of Bikila's Olympic triumphs and who followed the remaining years of his short life with sympathy. Neil, how do you evaluate Bikila in the history of sport?
Oh, tremendously important, because he showed that the athletes from Africa could be the best in the world. I remember those of us who were in Rome for the Olympics, we so-called experts, none of us gave him a chance of winning the marathon, even though he'd done a good time, because we had frankly never heard of him before. And yet when he did win, one remembers so clearly the way he came trotting up the floodlit Appian Way and spread-eagled the field with his uninhibited running. And of course, from that marvellous effort in 1960 came a tradition which I think has inspired thousands of African athletes to do the same and to try and win a gold medal as he did.
So the world interest in African athletes really began with Bikila?
Oh, certainly, but first of all we had to find out about Bikila himself. I remember at the moment when he won the Olympic marathon in Rome, one of the journalists said, "I suppose he's a member of the Imperial Guard of Haile Selassie," and of course, so he was. As well as being a professional soldier, we also discovered that this mysterious marathon champion was a devoted family man with his wife and young son. Outside the home, he was also an all-round sportsman who enjoyed basketball and horse jumping, as well as football, hockey and polo. A national hero to the youth of Ethiopia. But when it came to training, Abebe Bikila, a shy and retiring man, had to be on his own, as he pitted his strength and stride on the back-breaking Ethiopian highlands. The only man he was really close to during these hours of dedicated training was his coach, Oni Niskanen, who prepared Bikila for his second historic marathon in the 1964 Tokyo Olympics.
What was the reaction of the journalists when Bikila won the marathon in Tokyo for the second time?
Well, you know, we'd virtually been hypnotized, because we had on our desks in the press seats in the Olympic Stadium in Tokyo hundreds and hundreds of miniature television sets, which, while we were watching the other events, we could also see for more than 2 hours a picture of Bikila running and running and running. At last, with his final strides in the classic 42-kilometre event, Abede Bikila of Ethiopia entered the Tokyo Stadium alone, to the roar of the crowd and the excited voices of the television commentators.
That's the way he sees the giant crowd, nearly 100,000 people waiting to greet the only man in Olympic history to retain the marathon title. So Abede Bikila demonstrates to the crowd how easy it all was. It's still full of itself, and there's never been a marathon champion who finished with a performance like this. More than 30 years of age, superb piece of showmanship. A true Olympic champion, Abede Bikila of Ethiopia.
Late on Sunday night, March the 23rd, 1969, Bikila's car skidded off the road and somersaulted. For 12 hours in the bitter mountain cold, he lay trapped in the wreckage of his car with a broken neck. He was only discovered when a passing motorist decided to take a closer look at an arm dangling from the wrecked automobile. It was a miracle that he survived at all.
6 days after the accident, on March the 29th, he arrived at London Airport, bound for the world-famous Stoke Mandeville Hospital. We gain an insight into how Bikila came to terms with the terrible reality from the head of the Spinal Injuries Unit, Dr. Walsh.
Abebe broke his neck, to put it very bluntly, and of course damaged his spinal cord. As a result of that, he had lost movement in most muscles of his fingers and hands. He could move his wrists and elbows and shoulders. He had no movement at all feeling in his trunk or lower limbs. And in addition, of course, he'd lost control of natural functions. But he was certainly very patient during his 3 months in bed, and equally patient and very hard-working during his later, more active training. When he had to do all these exercises and so on, he kept at it. Abebe had to learn, firstly, things like pushing his wheelchair, and the very practical things of learning to feed himself and to write and type. This meant that he had to overdevelop the muscles which were left with voluntary power to try to compensate for the muscles which were paralyzed.
Forward and lift and shoulders down.
This meant, in fact, an awful lot of exercise at the gymnasium and a good deal of sport for rehabilitation purposes.
Under the dedicated guidance of remedial gymnast Peter Ayton, Bikila fought to overcome his disabilities.
Well, when Abebe Bikila came to me, first of all, he was brought down to me in the archery unit. He'd been up about a month or so, 3 months after his accident, and a month out of bed. And for the beginning part, I found it rather difficult to get through to him because, of course, of the language difficulty. Okay. The reason you're firing low. Hook on again. Now you're hooking too low. Come up. All right? Now try that. Left arm up. That's better. And also I found that at that time he tended to be rather withdrawn. I think mainly because he thought he had finished competition in sport completely. I taught Abebe 3 main sporting accomplishments. One was archery, one was table tennis, and one was swimming in the hydrotherapy pool. Of all these, the main sport in which he obviously excelled, we found, was in archery. The reason for this was that in this sport he was able once again to compete against other people, and in point of fact became quite adept at the sport. I saw Abebe again the following year after he'd left the hospital, and he came back representing his country in the International Paraplegic Games. Although he didn't win the competition, but came up very, very high in the ratings.
On Thursday, October the 25th, Abebe Bikila suffered a brain hemorrhage. At his funeral, Ethiopia paid tribute to her hero. He was buried with military honors in the presence of the emperor, fellow athletes, and a huge crowd.
But I will say the most important quality which I think Abebe had was a basic philosophy of accepting whatever happened to him in life.
He was a very, very courageous man, and that he had a spirit which was very, very high indeed.
So despite all that courageous struggle, he really had only 4 years of life after the accident.
Yes, I'm afraid so. But I prefer to think of him not as the champion struck low, but as the marvellous athlete of Tokyo, a man who surpassed the barriers of time and distance and stamina, and ran,